The following episode may contain explicit language and spoilers. Listener discretion is advised.
It just makes me a little bit sort of like, I just want them to realize that they're not just making comics for straight white men anymore. Hello and welcome to What's Your Fandom, the podcast where myself and my good friend Stuart journey through the fandoms of film, TV, games, books and comics, flying our geek flags and talking our way through the multiverses, all of them. My name is Mike, and in this episode we're going to be talking about comics, aren't we, Stuart?
Absolutely.
This is interesting. This is going to be an interesting one because you are a comic connoisseur and I am very much a noob. That's how I would describe my comicness. There's no word. Comic reading. I can't speak. I am not a comic book reader or clearly a speaker of clear words in sentences that make sense, which is great when you decide to record yourself for others to listen to. Anyway, before we get on to the comics, though, I just wanted to ask, how are you?
I'm very well, yes. And how are you?
Oh, I'm not bad, thank you. I went to see the latest Scream movie last night in the cinema, which is the first time I've been to the cinema since I went to see Halloween. Halloween Ends on Halloween. So it's been a really long time. And I know you're not a horror fan, really, but I really enjoyed it.
Excellent.
It was Scream 6, I think. Have there been 6? I think this is the 6th.
Wow, I will say that although I'm not a horror fan, like I'm scared to even make eye contact with people, let alone watch somebody.
Yes.
Let alone watch somebody hack and slash. But I will say with the Scream films, I do enjoy the Scream movies, and I've seen up to Scream 4.
Oh wow! Okay,
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
like Scream 5 came out last year, I think, or the year before. It was fairly recent.
Mm.
This is the sequel to that, because that film was weird. It was a sequel, but it was also like they call it a requel, which is like a new, like a fresh start, which is like following on from other films, but they're starting their own story, and it has like legacy characters as well as new characters.
Right.
So it was quite an interesting concept.
Mm.
And then this one was the sequel to the requel,
Wow.
which did have legacy characters in it as well.
What a way to milk a franchise, man.
Honestly, and essentially that was what they called it. They were like, yeah, we're now in a franchise. But I will say what I love about Scream is the kind of meta talking about horror movies in a horror movie.
Yes.
I love that so much.
Yes.
And it kind of continued in the most recent one, and I will say it was a good one.
Yeah.
It was a good one. You know, it was what you were always going to get from a Scream film. So yeah, but yeah, it was worth a watch.
I wonder now, just very briefly, because obviously it was Wes Craven that did the original films, and he passed away recently. I say recently, wasn't it like a year or two ago? Might have been longer than that.
I think it was longer than that, but I couldn't put a date on it.
Yeah. I just wondered how the films are received now that he's not in the picture. Like,
the last one was received very well, by all accounts, and then this one seems to have been received very well as well. So that's quite interesting. I think this franchise certainly does have legs, and there's been TV shows as well. I think
so. Yes.
I haven't watched those, but yeah, very interesting. So I went to see that. But I haven't been to the cinema for a while, and it was quite nice to go, actually. It's something that I've missed. I do enjoy the cinema. But I haven't been, like you know already, I haven't been going to see the new Marvel films in the cinema because I'm waiting for Disney Plus, because I'm already paying for that. And at the end of the day, you know, cost of living crisis and what have you, you know, there's certain things you kind of you choose to afford or not. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So yeah, but it just felt like quite a nice event to go and see a Scream film, see a slasher, and yeah, it was good. So well worth a watch if you haven't seen it and you are that way inclined. Yes. Yeah. So anyway, let's talk about comics, right? So I think maybe I'll start this one in telling you kind of my very brief history of comics, because I don't think it will take very long. So my sort of history with reading comic books is that, so I'm a Doctor Who fan, right? And there are Doctor Who comics. I don't know if you're aware, but there are Doctor Who comics, and they are being made now. They carry on, and it's a really clever way of expanding the universe and having no budget, as in no budget restraints, because you can draw what you want. And using characters from all different kind of eras and mixing them all together. And it's something that I only got into kind of fairly recently, and there's so many out there. And what I have found the best thing to do in terms of comics, because this is my general struggle, isn't it? It's like where to start with a comic story. And you and I have briefly discussed this before in another episode. I think it was our introduction episode. Possibly. Way back when, which we recorded bloody ages ago. So it's something that I was able to follow like a doctor. So I could choose, say, David Tennant, and I could start reading some David Tennant comics. And they are fairly reasonable to buy in terms of cost. But what I found really good is that on Amazon there's an app called Comixology. And it's a way to read comics on your Kindle or your phone or whatever. And actually, that's been really good for me because it doesn't fill my house full of more paper. My house is already filled with so much Kindling that I just don't think I need just all the comics and the issues and stuff. What's cool as well, though, is that you can. I don't know. Do you use Comixology? Is it something that you're familiar with?
I've seen it. But I've never actually used it.
What's quite cool is you can double click on the portion that you're reading, and it will highlight that portion, and the rest of the screen goes black, so you can just see that portion of the page. And if you click the screen again, it takes you to the next slide on that page. So it takes you through the story one kind of cell at a time. And then if there's something significant on the page as a whole, like an illustration behind the cells of what's going on, it'll then show you the whole page before you turn the page. So it's quite clever. And I think that would be kind of the one thing that I think possibly alienates me if I overthink it when it comes to comics, is how would you read it? Left, right, up to down, diagonally? There's no rules, is there? You can tell a story however which way you want to, but generally it's like start in the top left corner, move right, and then you kind of follow the story through, but that isn't necessarily always the way.
No, it's
not.
So
that has helped me in Comixology in reading the comics, and I have read several Doctor Who comics on there. There's so many, but I read one recently which was really good, which was a story about a character called Missy, who you're not going to know anything about, so I'm not going to go into it in depth. But it was a really good story that took a character from the Doctor Who universe and gave them their own story, which was entertaining, and it was a laugh. And actually, what I really enjoyed about it was not just the drawings, but the characterization. They really got that character very well. Like her dialogue was very much what she would say in the show, and I was saying it in my head as if I was that character. So that was quite cool. So clearly the writing was very well done, especially in terms of dialogue. So that's kind of what I've read before that. I've read just a bunch of Doctor Who comics, and then you have very kindly lent me a graphic novel and some comics to read, which I have read, so that we can discuss on this episode. But before we get to that, tell us about your involvement in comics and comics' involvement in your life.
Well, I was quite late getting into it, I suppose. I mean, I think we briefly covered this in the intro, but I didn't actually start reading comic books until I was in my 20s. I think a lot of people would have assumed that it was when I was like a teenager or something, but very late getting into it. But I share your sort of your dread in terms of like, oh my gosh, where do I start reading? Because I was getting comic books from Swansea Comics. Shout out to those guys who were in the arcade, by the way. It's a great shop. What's nice about that shop is it's when you walk in. Have you been into Swansea Comics?
I feel like I have. Is it in Picton Arcade?
Yes.
Yes, I have been, but it was probably a long time ago. And then
Um,
you walk in and there's a wall of comics,
yes.
several walls, and again, unless you know what you're looking for, it can be
Mm.
overwhelming.
It is, yeah. I remember going in there. I'm not saying this was the first ever comic book I bought, but certainly quite early on. Well, it's certainly the first time going into that shop, anyways, that you feel like the shop, because the shop is physically, it's quite small. So all the
Yes,
stuff feels a lot closer to you.
yes.
I remember picking up, I think it was an issue of Daredevil, but on the front cover it was Daredevil and Captain America.
Oh,
And it was something like issue number 4 or 5. I just saw it and it was like a couple of quid, where I was like, oh yeah, I'll get that. I remember like taking it, and remember the guy behind the counter. I forget his name, but he doesn't work there anymore. He was a really nice guy, um, but he was very like, how can I put it? He was quite like loud and confident, and like those people just like naturally just shout when they talk.
yes.
He's just one of those guys, right? So for me, I was already quite intimidated going into the shop,
Okay.
and I'm not. If I'm around people I don't really know, I'm a bit like, oh, and I sort of keep my head down, and as I said before, don't really do eye contact as such.
No. Mustn't look at other human beings.
Yes. Um, so yeah. So anyway, so I bought this comic book, and I enjoyed it, and I went back like about a week or two later, and I asked him. I said, "Oh, I bought issue number 6 last time. Have you got 1 to 5?" And he basically advised me how like those books had gone out of stock, because of how quick they come in, they go out and whatnot. But because of the way he sort of like phrased it, I felt like I was sort of having a row a little bit.
Oh,
He meant it in like a nice way. I think again because he was quite confident with the way he spoke and stuff, and quite almost assertive, I would say. So there's nothing personal, obviously, but he was just like, he's like, yeah, man, those have been and gone. And I was like, oh, it's a shame. He's like, yeah, you wanna read all these books, you got to make sure you're in. You want to be here for issue 1, you got to make sure you're here for issue 2. Right, they're gone. There was nothing I can do about it. And I was like, oh, okay, that's no problem. And he's like, you might be able to find them online. I was like, oh, okay. So it's just quite
yeah.
like, oh, but then that's when I realized, like, the comic book world itself is so vast, and as you say, you go in, like now, if I think about it, like if I'd be like, why did you pick up issue number 6? What are you doing? You started number 1. It seems silly now, but at the time, it was like, oh, I'll get this one, because you don't realize how like how episodic comic books can be.
No, that's right.
I mean, would you start watching Game of Thrones on episode 6? Very unlikely.
Very unlikely.
So it's a similar kind of it has a similar sort of effect. So if you want to really know what's going on, your best bet is to start at issue number 1, and go from there. So yeah, that was my first sort of experience of comic books.
Yeah.
And then from there, I signed up to a subscription, and I was following a story for Superior Spider-Man, and I got that from issue 1 all the way up to the last issue. I think it was every week or 2 weeks it was coming out. So it was going in,
Wow.
and it was there. They were chucking in like these sort of side comics as well, which kind of had something to do with the story, but not really.
Right.
But at the time, I was like, yeah, I'll take them all, like, and they've been ordered in for me. So I was like, yeah, I'll just have them, like.
I feel obliged.
Yeah. They were a good read, like, in it. But yeah, I think I enjoyed that storyline, because when I heard the premise of it, I was like, oh my God, I've got to read that. That sounds amazing. And I knew, like, oh, it's coming out in a couple of weeks. I was like, right, this is my chance now to start on number 1 and see it all the way through.
Yes.
So that was good.
Oh, that's cool. So when you're reading a comic, like, so based on my experience of reading the Doctor Who ones, like on the screen, because I have got a couple in physical form, but they come out in graphic novels as well. So I have bought a couple of those, and they've been quite cool because you get to appreciate it in a different way. But when you're reading it, like, do you read it quite quickly? Because I feel like there's obviously there's images that are telling a story, So you can look at a page for a few seconds of just of a fight, for example, between a hero and a villain, and there's no writing. So you just look at it and you go, okay, they're fighting. You look at it and you can appreciate the artistry to a degree, and then you move on. So it's quite a quick thing in a way.
Yeah, I think single issues I could probably read a single issue in about 10 minutes,
That's fast.
maybe 15. But it depends as well. Like, on they have a sort of a rough kind of page count.
Yeah. Oh
or
yeah,
whatever.
you can sense that this particular portion of the story is written to last a very specific amount of time.
Mm.
Because, so talking about what you let me borrow a Batman graphic novel, which is The Court of Owls, Volume 1. And can I just say, I bloody enjoyed it. I really, really enjoyed. There's so much in this that I really liked. And in terms of the reading speed, I read kind of it by issue. I read the first issue and then put it down. I was like, cool. And I digested that issue. And then later on that week, I went to the next one. And it took me a little while to read, but in a good way.
Yeah.
I wanted to appreciate what was happening and really give myself a chance to take the story in as well as look at the images, which are stunning in this, by the way.
Yeah, that's Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo.
That's right.
I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Yeah, it's a good story because I think what's nice about it, it's a good introduction for like reading a Batman story where you don't really have to faff with the origin story.
No, you know who Batman is.
Yeah, and also there's not much. I don't think there's much like exposition about like what's happened before. You just read Volume 1 for Volume 1.
Yes, it was a really good starting point, and there was a really interesting mystery, and I really, really got into it. Like, so much so that I was like, I said to you, I was like looking online for it, like, well, how much are the rest of them? And where do I get them from? And that's when I sort of started to spiral again, because I was looking at what the next issue was, which was part 2, volume 2 of The Court of Owls. It's got a different name, isn't it, I think?
Yeah, it's City of Owls.
City of Owls. I was like, cool. So I could follow there was an owl theme going on. And then the third volume then is a completely different name, I think.
Yes.
Is it something to do with the Joker?
Yeah, so the third one is called Death of the Family.
Right.
Which is important to note that it's not... There was another Batman book called A Death in the Family.
Right, okay.
It's a totally different story, but it does revolve around the Joker.
See, so then I was like, okay, so I think what... It was just, I was like, straight away, I was like, right, so hang on, is that the next one? Is that part of the next one? Is that the start of a new one? Or is it like you said, is it like a side step? Is it something else that's happening at the same time? And I was like, okay, I'm already getting overwhelmed. Yes. Where do I go next, sort of thing? But like, I really, really want to carry on this story because it fascinated me.
Yeah.
And I read it, like, how can I explain this? I read, like I said, kind of each issue kind of as it was, sort of slowly. And I was trying to take my time and look at the pictures and things. I really enjoyed the parts that were in Batman's brain.
Yes.
The kind of monologue that you were hearing, as I imagine kind of like a voiceover in a film. And I enjoyed that. And I found myself reading them in a different way to how I would say the rest of it. In my brain, like, I don't know, I was kind of like, putting on the Batman voice, which I can't do very well. You can do very well, but I can't do it. So I had my little Batman voice going on, and I was enjoying those because they really were kind of like the thread that took me through each page. So I really appreciated those. They helped me with that, and it's really nice to step back then and look at the images for what they are. Like, I've got it in front of me and I'm looking at a picture of the Batcave, and there's a dinosaur.
Yes.
And there's other costumes and cases, and there's bat vehicles hanging from the ceiling with bats, and there are other bat vehicles on like a revolving platform, and I was like, there's just so much going on here, and because I don't need to know what they all are, but I can appreciate that I kind of know what they are, but I don't really need to. There's a bat boat as well. I've just seen it.
Yeah, is there a giant coin there as well?
Yes, there is.
Yes, yeah.
There's a giant coin, and there's a big dice, and there's just so they're just I don't know. I just like that's all there, and I enjoyed that, and I didn't know who the characters were because you do get to see them at the Tim Drake, Damian Wayne, Dick Grayson. I know these names, but I don't know explicitly who they are. If you know what I mean.
Right.
So, but I learned enough of what I needed to know through the story. So it was a really good jumping on point. And is this well thought of in the fandom of Batman?
Oh yeah, Court of Owls is it's I think it's one of those go-to books, I think, for a lot of people for this sort of era of comic books. This is a sort of the modern age of comic books now.
Okay.
I mean, so I think that book came out in like 2011.
Okay.
And I think you notice on the front it says New 52.
Yes, I did. What is that?
Right.
That's a very, very small question I sent with a very large answer.
In basic terms, it's a name that they used to establish a rebooted universe within DC Comics.
Okay, cool. That was very succinct. Okay. So I have a question on continuity then.
Right.
Like, how does that get... Like, you can use this as an example if you want the Batman one, because it might be the easiest way to explain it. But, like, how important is the continuity then in the Batman comics, moving through these comics?
I've always looked at Batman stories as generally quite sort of self-contained for a lot of it.
Okay.
It depends what you follow. If you follow in single issues, that's important for continuity. But those single issues will eventually lead to the creation of a graphic novel.
Okay.
Or a volume or whatever.
Yeah.
But I've got, I mean, this might shock you. I've got over 20 Batman graphic novels, right? In total.
I'm not shocked, Sue. That doesn't shock anybody, let's be honest.
No one's shocked at that.
No one's shocked. Only 20? That's what that's what's shocking.
Everybody's spitting their tea out right now.
I know, right? Good grief.
For the most part, I would say that they're very much self-contained. There are books that are sort of like with Court of Owls, for example. Court of Owls and City of Owls. That's like one story in continuity.
Okay.
Death of the Family, which comes next. That doesn't have many ties to the previous book, so it doesn't really have anything to do with City of Owls.
Okay.
So there's not really a link. There might be some sort of throwaway lines where they mention something in the city, or like, oh, that thing that happened briefly.
Got you. I mean, that happened in this, to be fair. There were a few things where they mentioned something, and I was like, oh, that's from another comic. Okay. But I didn't know what it was, but I didn't really need to know. But
no, you don't.
No.
Yeah. Equally with books 4 and 5 of this series, I think they're titled Zero Year. And that's another sort of two-parter story. But it's just those two books.
Right.
But volumes 4 and 5 are a prequel to...
You see, this is what I'm saying. This is what I'm trying to say. I don't think it's an easy thing to get into. This is my only kind of criticism, because there's so much, like, maybe, like, okay, I really liked this reading this, and so much so, and because of the podcast that we make that you're listening to, it's meta, I have started following DC on a lot of socials, and they put up like what's released this month or what's released this week, and you get like the front cover of different comics and stuff, which is really cool. But you realize just how big this is. And that can be, obviously, like I said, quite daunting, but I imagine it being really satisfying as well as a fan. If you're following a story and you're getting all this content, and you start off with the Court of Owls and go through and you've got years of stuff to read, that's awesome. But it is just really big.
It is. I think it's quite oversaturating as well. I think because the issue that the issue, um, the issue they've had with comic books recently, especially with DC, is that I can't remember how many it was, but they release titles every month for their comic books, and I think at one point they were releasing, because let's say so from DC's point of view, they want you to buy all their titles every month, right?
Uh-huh.
They were releasing like a crazy amount. I think it was something crazy like, I'm sure it was something like 30 titles. So that's like 30 different books.
Oh my God.
At one point, I don't know if it's still ongoing. This is what causes further confusion, especially for newbies, is there might be 2 or 3 different Batman stories.
Yeah.
Sort of like there might be, oh, this is Batman issue number 1. But over here, this is Detective Comics issue number 1. And over here, this is Batman and Superman issue number 1. So you're like,
yes.
What? But they're all separate branches of this
they are
colossal tree.
so how do you personally like follow it then?
What I tend to do now is I tend to stay away from single issues for the most part, only because
it's got to be a space issue, right? You can't.
It's a space issue.
Yeah.
It is a space issue. I mean, like I was reading a book, Batman Eternal, a good few years ago now, and in total there were 52 issues, because DC were loving the number 52 at the time.
Okay.
So that took me like a year to complete that collection, because it was a weekly issue.
Of course.
And even when I read it, it was the same sort of, like mystery detective thing going on.
Yeah.
I couldn't help but think like, oh man, I'm sure they could have wrapped this in 30 issues.
Right.
I just felt like they're dragging this one on a bit. And, now I think I've actually sold like half of them, I think, because I read them, I was done with them.
Yeah.
But like now I sort of go, no, graphic novels, because it's one book or maybe 2 or whatever. So it's a space saver to start with.
Yes.
Everything I want is in that book. I don't have to worry about tie-ins or whatever. It's there.
Yes.
I don't have to wait for the next issue, because sometimes as well there's like delays with comic books.
Right.
Where they might take a bit of a break over Christmas period or whatever.
Got you.
So there's that. But yeah, I tend to sort of pick and choose what I sort of go for. Normally, if I fancy a graphic novel, I'll be honest with you, I swing straight to Batman all the time.
Yeah. It's your thing. That's fine. Yeah.
So I go for that, and I've still got books where it's like, I don't quite have the complete collection of that. Recently, I've been reading. There's a series of books called Nightfall, which are, there's only 3 books, but they're massive. Like each book is a good like 800 pages each.
Okay.
And so I've read the first 2 volumes, but now it's like, right, I want to read volume 3, one for the story, because I'm I love the second one, the way it ended. I was like, right, I got to read number 3, but also for the completionist within me.
Of course. Yeah. I'd be the same. I'd be the same.
With the new 52 books, there's 10 books on just Batman, and that's not Detective Comics. That's just the title, Batman.
Wow.
So yeah, it is a lot, but I try to be sort of selective of what I go for.
Yeah.
And I would only go for it if I think I'll really enjoy it.
Of course, especially because you're investing in it as well. Yeah, I get that. I get that. What's really fascinating as well about a comic book, and if you think back to the fact that obviously comics were like the first place these characters kind of came from. These characters were created to live in comic books, not just Batman, but across all of the Marvel stuff and all the DC and everything in between. It's mad. This is where they belong, really, isn't it? It's like coming home, isn't it, to read a comic? And it's obviously it's strange because it's like watching a cartoon, but it's not. It's like reading a book, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's like watching a film as well, but it's not. And it's not always made for children because this particular story is very violent and graphic, and that's not a kids thing. So it's like it's straddling a lot of different things. It's trying to do a lot, isn't it?
Yes.
And obviously there's artistry here. I mean, even in this one that you've given me, it's stunning. There are some pages that you could have a print on the wall,
Yeah.
and it's just incredible. And then you've got a really good story, and I imagine it being really fascinating as how to put a comic together, because you've got your real collaborative thing between the writer of the story and the designing of how it fits onto the page, as well as the actual drawing of the drawings and putting it across the point of each page. I mean, there's a portion of this particular book that's in a labyrinth, which was such an incredible section of the story. Honestly, it was like I kept on reading it, being like, I need to see this in a film
Yeah.
because this would be epic. And for those of you who haven't read it, it's like Batman is trapped in a labyrinth underground. He's being played with, and he's going slowly, kind of spiraling and losing his mind, I guess, and losing strength. And it's really good, isn't it?
Yes.
And it's told in such a way that you're watching it. I'm saying you're watching it. I wasn't watching it. I was reading it because it's visual as well. You know, it's really clever. It's really, really clever, and I wonder how on earth you would begin to even start creating a comic.
Oh man.
Because that's where all these characters, they started in a comic, and look where they are now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy.
Fascinates me. Absolutely fascinates me.
Yeah.
Do you like follow artists or writers then through comics? Is that a way to sort of?
Yeah, that's one way of doing it. I think like this is the thing. A lot of with anything in it, like fans get divided over stories or writers or whatever. Like some people are genuinely turned off by some writers, and they're like, "Oh, that guy's crap" or whatever, and they don't like what they're doing. But then there are those writers then who are like, "Oh, this guy is like the legend for what he does."
I've got you.
So an example would be like Frank Miller.
Yes.
That's
the Dark Knight, isn't it?
Yes. So
yes.
So he did Dark Knight Returns, and then, but before that, he did Batman Year One, which is considered to be one of the best Batman graphic novels of all time.
Wow.
Along with Dark Knight Returns, as it happens. But what's interesting about his take was that he was the one. I think he was like the first writer to basically say, "I reckon Batman could go toe to toe with Superman."
Okay.
So that was quite like those two getting in a fight. Like
Right.
Batman's a human. Like really, one punch he's dead. But like Frank Miller created this story where it's like, no, Batman with enough prep time.
Yeah. Yeah.
With enough prep time, he could get Superman on his ass, like, and like I say, there's a lot of sort of bias that if you're like a big Batman fan, you might be like, oh yeah, he'll attack him or whatever. But then equally, if you're a massive Superman fan, you'd be like, no, he'd kill him straight away. So it's interesting when stuff like this happens, the fans of the respective characters, how they sort of contribute to the conversation.
Yeah.
So I mean, that is interesting.
I also have a question as well, leading on from that, about, I know this is a big topic, but I just want to kind of like touch on it because I couldn't help but not, having read this and also having read the 2 issues of The Amazing Spider-Man that you gave me, which we'll move on to shortly, is a question about representation. Because in reading this particular graphic novel, I mean, most people are white. Most people are straight. Yes, there are heroes and villains, but I wanted to ask you kind of a broader question about how the representation of different minorities and things is handled in comics.
Well, I know at the moment, in current comic books and stuff, it's very present. DC are very vocal with Pride,
Yeah,
DC Pride.
yeah.
So they do books for that, and they do have a lot. They have a lot of characters who are ethnic minority, who who are gay, who are. I think there might be trans characters, and I mean we've got from the Supergirl series you had Dreamer. Now I don't know if she's trans in the books or if they just did it for the show.
I'm
I'm
with
not
you.
sure,
Yes, yeah.
so I can't touch on that. But
But it's interesting in a world where all these different comics and how you say there are so many different variations and so many different kind of parallel worlds and there's so many different Robins and so many. Do you know what I mean? There's just there's so much that
Mm.
that and everything does seem to change subtly. Like you said, you've got Batman Year One, you've got Detective Batman, you've got the Batman, you've got this Batman, you've got Who Batman, you've got all those different Batmans, and then by changing one thing, say for example his sexuality in that particular comic, and everyone's up in arms. But saying in one comic he can defeat Superman, and then in another comic he is a down and out private detective. In another comic he's I don't know, a drug addict. Like those are all big changes to his character, which don't bat an eyelid. But sadly, the fandom seems to think that other changes are less acceptable than others. And that's really sad.
It is sad, but I think as well, probably what I should have covered at this point is that what they tend to do is the big characters like Batman, Superman, Captain America, Spider-Man, those big characters, they don't touch those characters.
They're unchangeable, aren't they?
Yeah. It's when they take side characters and decide to make them, like they've recently made Tim Drake was the third Robin. Now they've come out and said he's bisexual.
Right, okay.
So it's like, okay. They've done it with Superman's son. So that's sort of Jonathan Kent is his real name. And I think I don't know if he's Superboy or if he's just the next Superman. But like they've said that he's gay. But it's almost like it's their way of sort of being inclusive. But I think they know that if they do that with their cash grabbing big important characters, I think they know there's an element of risk where they're going to piss off the original fans. Do you get me?
It's completely. I do get you. It's completely fascinating, and it's one of those weird things where they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't. I think if they aren't, yes. if these people aren't making an effort for inclusion, then they are rightly so persecuted. And if they change something that's established already, they are then persecuted as well. Have there ever been any black Batmen?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Okay.
But he's not called Batman as such.
Okay, right.
This is what they do. Yeah, so you're aware of Lucius Fox, no?
Yes.
Right, so his son, I think his name is just Luke.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, he becomes a character called the Signal. And so that's another comic book series, Batman and the Signal. So he becomes a sort of a sidekick to Batman, but they have to establish him that he's different to Robin and why he's different. I think he has like a sort of a yellow costume. But there is also, I'm sure there's, yeah. Wait a minute, I'm getting my characters mixed up here.
Okay, please don't have another a name faux pas with any other Jeffreys, because we've already reaped the rewards of that one.
Yes, absolutely. No, I think there is a character played by Lucius Fox's son.
Okay.
Yeah, so his name is Luke Fox. So his character, he is a Batman. He's called Batwing.
Okay.
So he does have an actual Batman costume.
Okay.
Yeah. This is where I was getting confused. So the character I said, the Signal, that was a character called, his real name is Duke Thomas. And he's like a vigilante. And he basically, there was a comic book story called We Are Robin. And it was a campaign where students and young civilians were all joining like this movement where they all became Robin,
Oh,
where they all I've actually got that book. I think it's called the Robin War, where they all took on the mantle of Robin to uprise against the city. But what Duke Thomas then did is he went on to become an official member of the Bat family, and he became known as the Signal.
right. Okay.
Because often that happens. Characters they'll start off with one mantle and then move on.
Yes, they move on and through that, and that makes sense in comics. I just want to know, really, because this is kind of my problem. I mean, a lot of these big comics, they're American, right?
Yes.
They come from American writers, American producers, American money, and it's just sad that these artists have to make sure they don't change Batman too much, otherwise you will alienate the audience who are reading Batman. And whilst I do get that, it's just I want to see that there's some change happening in the comic book world. Basically, I want to know that there is some movement happening, and that there's just more inclusion of all different types of people in these things.
Yeah. Yeah, I notice it a lot more with DC over Marvel, but I think that's just because with the social media aspect, I just see more like DC posts.
You see it more, yeah, of course. Okay,
but yeah,
I don't know if you take it a step back, even if you think about Batman's got these amazing villains, hasn't he? That are almost as iconic as he is, and it just feels like that the Joker's obsession with Batman. I mean, it isn't that much of a stretch, kind of psychologically, to think about his obsession as being almost sexual. I feel like it could go there, couldn't it? Very kind of plausibly. Not necessarily from Batman's point of view, but from the Joker's point of view. Not that I'm saying that the Joker is gay or the Joker should be gay. I'm just saying that it could go that way.
Yeah, I think with the Joker, there has always been this thing of that it's almost like a love interest.
It is. They're almost each other's love interest. It's weird.
Yeah, that has been quite present. The level of obsessiveness. It's like you would say to him, "Oh, it's like you're in love with him," and yeah, that's.
I don't think you'd be far wrong.
Yeah.
In saying that.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I think this is, as you said before, it's tricky from a writer's perspective, because the thing is, this is much like with films, isn't it? Just because the director is making the film doesn't necessarily mean it's them that are making the decisions.
No, their hands are tied wherever the money is, but wherever they make the money. And if it just makes me a little bit sort of like, I just want them to realize that they're not just making comics for straight white men anymore, even though probably the majority of comic book writers and readers are straight white men. I have no basis on that. I have no information about that. I see. Otherwise, why would they still be making the same stories, and why would such small changes, in my mind, cause so much uproar?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, there's a very kind of blatant response to it. I think the problem is as well is that there has to be an element of balance, because I read comic books because I want a good story.
100%.
I want to see an interesting character, whether they're gay or not. I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but my priority is I hope this is a good story. I don't flick open a book and go, well, I hope they're gay, or I hope they're black, or whatever.
No, but I think but what's tricky about that is that you are used to seeing straight white males in these comic books, and you are a straight white male, so you are seeing yourself all the time in these roles. It's just a given. It's just the majority, the norm is that. So if you are I don't if you're any other minority, and it's not in the comic at all, and you could open 10 comics in the top 10 and not be in there, then that's a problem, because that is pushing an agenda, whether they like it or not.
Yeah.
Whether it's it's obviously a business decision. Clearly it is, because they want to make money, and I get that. But I would just hope that things are starting to change.
Yeah. Well,
I don't mean go and make Batman gay. That's not what I'm saying at all. Because I don't see Batman as being gay. That's not something that's ever, he's had love interests that are female. If one day they did turn around and give him a male love interest, then it would be a big problem for a lot of people. Like, I get that, and there's a whole latent homophobia in a lot of things. But there are other opportunities in these comic books to, like what they've done with what you said. One of the Batmen, I can't remember which one you said, he's bisexual. That's just an aspect of who he is. Like how Bruce Wayne is in this particular novel obsessed with the Court of Owls, and has been since he was a child. That's an aspect of his character, and that's one of his drives. And I think as readers, we all have a drive and a need and a want to just see a version of what is our lives in reality there. I think these people have a responsibility to put this kind of stuff in the mainstream ones, and not just do is it Tim Drake? Is that what his name was?
Yeah.
A Tim Drake comic series for the bisexuals to be able to go and buy. That's not what I mean. Representation should be there at all times for everybody. I don't think there's a black character in this book, and it only dawned on me because it's visual.
Yeah.
Now, if I was reading the novel, and they just describe them as having black hair, they could be any race, and in my head, I could make them any race I wanted to.
Yes.
But because it's visual, and there's even there's one particular page that I've just accidentally flicked to, which has whilst this Bruce Wayne is in the labyrinth, the other characters that are looking for him, and there's a Batgirl, and there's a Catwoman, and there's a few different Robins, and they're all white.
Yeah.
And I was like, there's no black characters, and that was quite surprising to me reading it, actually.
But keep in mind though that that's just in the book that you're reading. So within like the larger universe, there are black characters within the Batman family, within the Batman.
I'm glad, because there should be.
Yeah, but I think as well. Okay, I'm not to sort of like I'm not trying to sort of trick you into giving me like one of these answers here, but I'm just like curious to know. You have creative control over a comic book, right? Let's say it was this black and white. It's not. Because if it was, then things would be very different.
Okay.
Somebody comes up to you and says, I want you to make a comic book. You could put your focus into one of two things. You can put your focus into representation and inclusiveness, or you can put it into story.
Now, see, this is where I don't think they're mutually exclusive.
Right.
I feel like telling a good story includes inclusivity. Includes inclusivity. So, for example, there's a scene at like at that benefit where Bruce is out telling everybody about his vision of what Gotham is going to be, and there's crowd scenes, right? And there's just images here. There's a few of them, few stills of crowd scenes, and every single character is white.
Really?
Every single character is white, and I just feel like that's ridiculous. That isn't making a main character black. That isn't making a main character bisexual. That is just including other races in Gotham.
Yeah.
But in answer to your question, sorry, I don't think that those things are mutually exclusive, because in order to tell a good story, you need good characters and you need a good plot.
Yeah.
Now, those characters, you don't have to negate inclusivity to have a good character telling a good story. And I think the focus should be on both of those things, on all of those things.
Yeah.
It should just be a good story, and it should have good characters, and there should, an element of those characters. Because the thing is about a comic is, okay, a lot of the time, you're just telling the narrative, aren't you? Because these
Yes.
the speech bubbles and the kind of monologues, it's just about that particular story in that particular graphic novel, getting from point A to B.
Mm.
I get that, but in comics, it's a visual medium.
Yes.
So you're being given the action sequences, you're given the quiet moments, the flashbacks, you're getting giving it all in a drawing.
Yeah.
And so they do have a responsibility to have some inclusion, and that doesn't necessarily take away from the story.
No,
I don't think. I do understand that people think. Oh, I say people. There's a section, a subsection of fandom that argues that they're putting inclusivity above telling a good story, and I couldn't disagree more with that. Really, I think because I feel like from my perspective, there is room for everyone in any story.
Yeah.
And for example, this is the first thing that came to my mind: the fact that Dumbledore is supposed to be gay in the Harry Potter books, but it's never mentioned.
Yeah.
I don't think it would have hurt the story to mention it.
Mm.
Whether it was relevant in the first 6 books or not, it becomes relevant in the last book, or the sixth or seventh. It becomes relevant because have you read them? Sorry, I don't know whether I've seen the films. There's a character that Dumbledore becomes very close with growing up, and it essentially says in the book they fall in love when he's a man, the boy, that they're both teenagers together, and it was implied but it was never said. And it's a bit like, well, it could have been said. It didn't have to be. I guess it was implied, but it would have made sense to say it, but they chose not to say it.
Yeah.
Now, that choice, bearing in mind how important Dumbledore is in the story of Harry Potter, and who Dumbledore is of massive importance to the whole story, and how Dumbledore became who he is vital in the defeat of Voldemort.
Right.
And the fundamental root of who Dumbledore is as he becomes a teenager and learns about his sexuality is that he's not straight. Right. And that has made him become who he is. Yes. And I think that's not a question then of that. I mean, in that respect, then gay people are underrepresented in that, because they could have said, well, he's gay, and that would have been like, hey, he's gay. It wouldn't have made a difference. I know the problem is, obviously, we're living in a world full of prejudice.
Yeah. And
these people, these executives with all this money, are putting all this money into these things to sell stuff. And by showing, it's so sad, by living in a world where showing support to minorities immediately gets people backlash, because then the kind of heteronormative world isn't going to invest in that. So they're worried about losing money because straight people won't pay for it.
Yeah.
That's that's horrendous.
Yeah, that is right. Yeah.
And as long as I'm hoping that the comic world kind of is moving forward and is sort of developing a broader spectrum of people to be seen in these comics, because at the end of the day, a lot of them are made for children. I'm not saying children need to have all this complicated, difficult stuff that these characters are going through, because not every child's going to go through all that, you know. But it's important for those children that do go through difficulty in, for example, maybe realizing they're gay, to understand and be able to see themselves in a comic book. I think it's important.
Yeah. Well, I think, I mean, the book that I've given you, the Corvallis, that's from like 2011.
Yes.
So I know there has been a massive increase now of particularly gay characters within DC, to the point where when they did like the DC Pride, they showcased like their sort of characters.
Yes.
In the front, and there's a lot of gay characters.
That's so good. That's really good that they're doing that.
In fact, I just had a quick little Google now with DC Comics just to see, and on their database here, it's a list. Now there's different characters, so I clicked on I clicked on homosexual characters specifically, and in total, it's in alphabetical order, but it's a total of 375 items.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Now, what I will point out with that is that, this is with comic books, you have like the multiverse and stuff.
Yes.
So a lot of these characters, are like from alternate Earths or from TV shows, or like they've got like, do you ever watch Legends of Tomorrow?
I've seen bits of it, yes.
Right, so it's Sarah Lance in that.
Yes.
But she came across a character called Ava Sharp, who worked for some Time Bureau thing. But they've put her down as a gay character. They got
I see.
There's somebody from Gotham. There's somebody from Smallville. So they've included like everyone beyond comic books as well.
I've got you.
But the point is, yeah, look. So the Harley Quinn TV show, which I think is on E4. I've never watched it.
No, me either.
But there's a character here. He originated in the Batman animated series, and he's called the Clock King. And now they've come out and said that he's gay.
So not the Clock King, but I'm sorry.
Yes. Maybe that's why. Maybe
it was just too obvious. They misspelt it all this time.
Or maybe he's not actually gay. They just misheard him, and he went, "I'm the Clock King." Did he just say what I think he said?
They did, yeah. Maybe that's what happened. No, it's really good. I'm really glad that's happening. But like, it was just something that I noticed in reading that, and in reading the Amazing Spider-Man, similar situation.
Yes.
Like, there didn't seem to be a lot of representation, and I just want to just like draw a line into that point, and just by saying that representation is really important, and for everyone, and it's not about ticking boxes, and it's not about putting inclusivity in ahead of storytelling, because what you need for good storytelling is just amazing characters and then a plot, okay? But the amazing characters all have a background and all have a history that you often learn about in flashbacks and things, don't you? And you kind of figure out why, in this particular one, for Bruce Wayne made decisions that he made. You saw flashbacks about him as a kid and his parents dying. And, we all know Bruce's motivations, I guess.
Yes.
And every character that we come across has got a backstory and motivations. And those things that they've been through have a direct impact in the decisions that they make and who they are and how they are in the story that you're telling. And that could be having an antagonistic character, it could be having a villain, it could be having somebody you get on with really well, it could be having comic relief, it could be all those things, all different characters with their own backstory. And that backstory does have to include other than straight white people. And that would give you different perspectives to tell different and interesting stories.
Yeah.
That is my underlining of that.
Okay.
So let's move on to something a little bit lighter. So I know we're going to wrap this up now because you've got to go pick the kiddies up from school. So, Stu, comic books is such a passion of yours, isn't it?
Yes.
And you love it, and I love that you love it. I love that the industry's still going as well, and it's still so prevalent as well. Because I mean, even following TC's social medias, you get to see how enthusiastic they are about all the new comic, and this is coming out. I know they want your money, but they're telling stories, and that's got to be good.
Yeah, it's like I say, I'm more selective now with the comics that I buy and stuff. But overall, it's such like an interesting. I always go back to comic books because I've got so many here that there are some that I sort of don't read again.
Yeah, that's fair enough. It's the same with books.
Yeah, but there are a lot of them. I go back to that.
Do you find they're more mainstream as well now, though? Like comics aren't just that kind of like subset of really like intense geek fandom. They're more mainstream now.
They are, yeah, totally. Yeah, I think obviously, you see them like HMV and stuff now, don't you? And,
yeah.
They're right there, like with like the vinyls and the DVDs and the Funko Pops and whatnot.
And actually, it's really hard to ignore the impact that comic books have had on culture, because right now we are in an age where cinema and TV is dictated really through the basics of comic books.
Yes.
It all came from then.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It is crazy, isn't it? And I think we forget sometimes, you know, just by like some of the complex answers I've given to such simple questions, how vast the comic book universe is.
And also, you are right, because this way of telling long form storytelling, which is what TV and comics have in common, which is what obviously the Marvel Cinematic Universe has started doing with having this Avengers plot and having all individual films and all interlocking and becoming one big story. This is what has been going on forever in comic
Yes.
books and now TV. And actually, the best way to really feel and love a character is by learning about them over a long period of time.
Mm.
And having the options to do that in comics is fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, I've always found that like as much as I admire like movie depictions and TV shows and stuff, I don't feel like it gets better than the actual comic book.
Wow.
I really feel that. Like I just think, especially with characters, especially with someone like Batman, like with Batman, he's so easy to get right in films, right? And he is, for the most part, anyway. As long as you don't put nipples on his suit.
Oh, now
Yeah.
you're just being too harsh. Come on, what have you got against nipples? No, carry on. Carry on.
I think that's why they keep making his films and stuff, and why they keep putting him in stuff is because he's a fan favorite anyway. But like, there's nothing sort of like goofy or silly about the character in his core sort of beliefs or in his development. That's a bit like it's a bit silly or whatever, or that's the kind of thing that would only happen in comic books. They found ways. That's why he's been interpreted in so many different ways in film and stuff. When we've had like Affleck's version, you've had Michael Keaton's version, Christian Bale's version, Robert Pattinson's. They're all Batman, but they're all handled so very differently.
And you're right there. Actually, having all these different depictions on screen right now will probably allow people a bit more kind of, if they haven't gone and looked at the comics, they perhaps more willing to, because they're willing to watch 4 different Batmen at one time now. Why not read about them?
Yeah.
I love how it all intertwines. It's amazing.
It is. It is. I think as well, when they do the films, you really feel like like everything you need to know about Batman.
Yeah.
But then if you go back to the comic books, then you might discover something else. And
you just learn so much more because it's such a deep pool to dive into.
Mm.
I've got a really like newfound love of comics from reading the Court of Owls. I said I loved Court of Owls. I thought it was such a good story, and I loved the images, and I want to read more. And I want to read more comics now. So now I said, like, I went shopping a week after I finished it, and Jane and I were like looking in Waterstones, like all the different graphic novels, and being like, oh, there's so much. This is a whole new world of like read to go to, and that's really exciting.
Yes.
So I have you to thank for that. And Batman, obviously, but like, yeah. I'm just gonna thanks Stu. Everybody, thanks Stu for comic books.
Thank you guys, thank you. Yes. Everybody sit down. Really quickly, and you mentioned that you read the Amazing Spider-Man issues.
Yes.
How did that go?
I enjoyed them actually, and the only thing that was a little bit tricky was that I say tricky, but that like there were other side comics in there as well, like you said, that had other characters at the forefront, and a bearing on the story, but weren't the same story. And I actually quite liked that. At first, I was like, "Wait, what's going on here?" I'm with the Black Cat. Like, what's happening here? And then I understood how it all kind of tied together, and I was like, there's so even in this one little volume here, they're building a whole universe around and a story around what's happening, and I really liked that. It took me a second to be like, hang on a second, what's going on here? I seem to have finished Spider-Man. I'm reading about somebody else now, but it all does connect. And I like what you told me about the fact that visually they have the visuals of like the Andrew Garfield era. This is like a separate story, and I really like them. I feel like Obviously, because of my dark and jaded soul, I am much more inclined to reach for a Batman right now, and I think it's to do with mood as well. You know, we've seen a lot of Spider-Man and a lot of like really good Spider-Man interpretations out there, and Batman is sort of like a bit of a underdog in a way in all this. Like Marvel and Spider-Man have got the kind of the monopoly at the moment, and DC and Batman are sort of a little bit of a step behind. But that, like what we've said in previous episodes, Batman is what's exciting me a bit more. So perhaps you and I talking about all the Batman and DC stuff, it got me really excited to read the Batman graphic novel, and so that's where my mood took me, and that's where I really enjoyed it. But yeah, no, Amazing Spider-Man I really enjoyed. I would be inclined to read some more, to be honest. I like the style. I like the artistry. I like the story. It was just Batman caught my attention at this point in time, which is why I kind of gravitated towards it. But then again, Harley Quinn, the one you gave me, that didn't catch my attention, and I haven't gone back into that.
No,
I read the first few pages and was like, "This isn't my mood. Put it down." It doesn't mean it won't be my mood in the future. It's just that right now it didn't grab me.
No.
So yeah,
that can happen with comic books as well. Like, I've been reading stuff thinking I was going to enjoy it, and then it's like, actually, no.
I think it depends on your how you are at the time as well, and what you're going through, and what you're in the mood for.
Yeah.
Because they can't all be hits.
No, of course not. There's no way.
Okay, Stuart. So, have you got a movie quote for us for this marvelous episode about comic books?
I do.
Oh my god! Right, hang on. Let me just prepare myself. Okay, I am ready.
The most important thing in life will always be my family.
Ooh. I mean, that's a lovely quote, and I absolutely love the sentiment, but I have no idea what it's from. Am I going to kick myself?
No, probably not, actually. You'll probably get over it.
Oh, okay.
You may even eye roll when you see where it's from.
No way. Okay, all right, okay. But fair play, that's a good sentiment, because that's actually really topical as well, because family is what drives all these stories, I think.
Yes.
In all these comics and all the TV shows, everything. It's all about family and relationships. Fascinating.
Thank you for listening to What's Your Fandom. Please hit the subscribe button to make sure that you never miss an episode. And if you could leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts, not only will we be your bestest friends forever, but it will also help other listeners to find us. You can follow us on TikTok and Instagram, where our username is @fandompod, and on YouTube just search for What's Your Fandom. And we will catch you next time.